Marcus Hale had not slept in 31 hours. That was not unusual for a Delta Force operator. Sleep was something that happened between missions. In short, stolen hours, often on the floor of a helicopter or against the cold wall of a forward operating base. But this time, the reason was different. This time, Marcus was not awake because of a mission. He was awake because of pain. The surgery on his shoulder had gone well, the doctors told him. The shrapnel had been removed cleanly. No nerve damage. He would recover full range of motion within 6 months if he followed the rehabilitation program. They said all of this in the careful, professional tone of people who gave bad news so often that good news had begun to sound the same way. Marcus nodded at all the right moments. He thanked them. And then he lay in his hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the ward around him, the soft beeping of machines, the distant footsteps of nurses, the occasional low voice of someone speaking into a phone down the hall. He was alive. He knew that. He was grateful for it, in the distant, quiet way that soldiers learn to be grateful. Not loudly, not with tears, but with a kind of steady, private acknowledgement that sits behind the eyes and does not move. What kept him awake was not the pain in his shoulder. It was the dream he kept almost having every time he closed his eyes. Not quite a dream, more like a memory that refused to stay in the past where it belonged. A helicopter, a woman's hand, a jagged wound running the length of a forearm, and one word, spoken so quietly he had never been completely sure he had actually heard it. Cold. He had carried that memory for 3 years. He had never told anyone about it, because there was nothing to tell that made sense outside of his own head. He had pulled a woman from a bombed market in Kunar province in 2006. He had carried her to the helicopter. He had held her hand during the flight because she was losing blood and going into shock. And sometimes, when a person is that close to the edge, a hand is the only thing that tells them there is still a reason to hold on. And then he had been redeployed, and she had disappeared into the enormous, indifferent machine of wartime medical transfers, and he had never found out what happened to her. He had asked twice. Both times, the answer was the same: status unknown. He had eventually stopped asking, not because he stopped caring, but because he had learned, over years of war, that some questions do not get answered. You carry them, you keep moving, you do the next thing, and the thing after that, and you build a life around the empty spaces, rather than inside them. But the scar stayed with him. The way it looked, pale and jagged, running from wrist to just below the elbow, like a map of something terrible that had almost won. He had seen 1,000 injuries in his years of service. He remembered this one, the way you remember the first time you understood that the world could be both brutal and beautiful in the same moment. He was thinking about all of this when the night nurse came in to check his IV line. She moved quietly and efficiently, the way experienced nurses do, without wasted motion, without unnecessary noise. She leaned over him to check the connection at his arm, and her sleeve shifted slightly, and Marcus saw it. The scar. Pale, jagged, running from wrist to just below the elbow. He stopped breathing. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. He had not slept in 31 hours. He was on pain medication. The mind does strange things under those conditions. He knew that. He was aware of it. But the scar did not disappear when he blinked. He looked at her face. He did not recognize it. In his memory, he had never clearly seen her face. She had been covered in dust and blood, her eyes closed, her head tilted away. What he remembered was not her face. It was her hand, and her arm, and that one quiet word. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "How did you get that scar?" The nurse looked up. She had calm brown eyes, and the expression of someone who had learned not to be surprised by the things patients said in the middle of the night. "An injury," she said simply. "A long time ago." "In Afghanistan," Marcus said. It was not a question. Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly, like a door that had been closed for a long time, moving on its hinges without fully opening. "Yes," she said carefully. "In Afghanistan. How did you know that?" Marcus's mouth was dry. He tried to find the right words, and discovered there were no right words for this. There was only the truth, which felt too large and too strange to say out loud in a quiet hospital room in Germany at 2 in the morning. "I think I carried you out," he said. Her name was Claire Renner. She was 31 years old. She had grown up in a small town in Wisconsin, the daughter of a man who had come home from Vietnam quieter than he had left, and had spent the rest of his life working as a paramedic, as if he could repay a debt that no one had asked him to repay. Claire had understood that debt without being told about it. She had grown up watching her father treat it as something sacred, the idea that you show up for people in their worst moments, that you do not look away, that you stay until the crisis is over, and sometimes long after. She had decided before she was 12 years old that she would do the same thing, in whatever form it took. She had become a nurse. She had volunteered with a humanitarian aid organization straight out of school. She had gone to Afghanistan in 2006 because she wanted to be where the need was greatest, and the need, in 2006, was greatest there. She had been stationed near Asadabad, in the east of the country, working out of a small clinic that served 3 villages and a population that had learned to be suspicious of outsiders, but had slowly, carefully, extended something like trust to the small team of aid workers who came every week and asked nothing in return. She remembered the day of the bombing only in fragments. She remembered the sound first, a pressure rather than a noise, something that hit the chest before it hit the ears, then dust, then darkness, then a voice. She had never been able to reconstruct the voice clearly. It was a man's voice, low and steady, the kind of voice that is deliberately calm because the speaker knows that calm is what the moment requires. It said things she could not quite make out, and then it said something she could make out, something she had held on to for 3 years, like a piece of wreckage in open water. "You're not alone." She had woken up in a hospital in Kabul with her left arm reconstructed and a gap in her memory where the rescue should have been. The doctors told her she was lucky. She had lost a significant amount of blood. Another 30 minutes, and the outcome would have been different. She asked about the people who had pulled her out. She was told it was a military operation, classified. She would not be getting names. She went home to Wisconsin and spent 6 weeks in her childhood bedroom, looking at the ceiling, listening to her father move around the house below her. He never asked her to talk about it. He knew, from his own experience, that talking about it was not always the thing that helped. Sometimes the thing that helped was just knowing someone was there. When she was ready, she went back to nursing. But she chose differently this time. She pursued a position with military hospitals, without quite being able to explain why, even to herself. She told herself it was because she was good at trauma care. She told herself it was because the work mattered. Both of those things were true. But the real reason, the one she did not say out loud, was simpler than that. She wanted to be close to the people who had been in the places she had been. She wanted, without knowing exactly what she was looking for, to find something she had lost in the rubble of that market. By 2009, she was at Landstuhl. She had been there for 14 months. She was good at her job. Her patients trusted her. She had learned to carry her own story quietly, the way her father had taught her, not as something to hide, but as something private, a weight she had chosen to carry alone, because she had not yet found the person she was meant to share it with. And then a patient grabbed her wrist in the middle of the night and told her he thought he had carried her out. She sat down in the chair beside his bed. She did not remember deciding to do it. Her legs simply stopped working, in the way that legs stop working when the world shifts under you, and you need a moment before you trust yourself to move again. "Tell me what you remember," she said. He told her. He told her about the operation, not the classified parts but the human parts, the market, the dust, the way the scene looked when they arrived. He told her about finding her under a section of collapsed wall, about the way her arm had looked, about carrying her to the landing zone. He told her about the helicopter, about holding her hand because she was going into shock and he did not know what else to do that would help, about the way she had squeezed his hand, hard, harder than he expected from someone that close to unconscious, hard enough that he had felt it in his own bones. And then he said the word. "You said something. One word. I was never completely sure I heard it right, but I think you said, cold." Claire put her hand over her mouth. She had never told anyone that. Not the doctors in Kabul, not her father, not the colleagues she had worked alongside for 3 years. It had stayed inside her as one of the few fragments she actually owned from that day, uncertain, unverifiable, but hers. "I said that," she whispered. "I remember saying it. I didn't know if anyone heard me." "I heard you," Marcus said. His voice was steady. His eyes were not. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she had walked into the room. She still did not recognize his face. She had never seen it, but she understood, in the way that some things are understood below the level of thought, that she was looking at the man whose voice she had been hearing in the back of her mind for 3 years. "I looked for you," she said, "after I recovered. I filed a request through the aid organization asking for the name of the soldier who pulled me out." She paused. "They told me the operation was classified." Something moved across Marcus's face, something quiet and complicated. "I asked about you twice," he said. "They told me your status was unknown." They were both silent for a moment. 3 years, different countries, different institutions, both of them looking, both of them hitting the same wall from opposite sides. "I didn't know if you made it," Marcus said finally. His voice was careful, like someone carrying something fragile. "I told myself you did. I needed to believe that, but I never knew." "I made it," Claire said. And then, because that felt insufficient for everything it contained, she said it again. "I made it." The weeks that followed were quiet and ordinary on the surface, the way important things often are. Claire requested a temporary reassignment to Marcus's ward. It was not an unusual request. She framed it as a scheduling preference, and no one looked closely enough to see that it was something more than that. She oversaw his rehabilitation with the same calm efficiency she brought to all her work, and Marcus followed the program with the focused discipline of a man who had spent his career doing hard things methodically. They talked, slowly at first, in the way that people talk when they are not sure how much of themselves to offer, and then more, and then easily, and then in the long, unhurried way that happens when two people discover they have been waiting for the same conversation without knowing it. He told her what the war looked like from inside a mission. She told him what it looked like from the end of a hospital bed. He told her about the guilt he had carried, the specific, grinding guilt of not knowing, of feeling that he had failed to close something that deserved to be closed. She told him something that she had never said to anyone, something that had been waiting for the right person to say it to. "I spent a long time being angry," she said. "Not at anyone specific, just angry, at the randomness of it, at the fact that I was standing in one place instead of another when it happened." She looked at her scar. "And then one day, I stopped being angry, and started being curious instead. Curious about who was there, what they saw, whether they thought about it the way I thought about it." "I thought about it," Marcus said. "I know that now," she said. On his last morning at Landstuhl, Claire walked him to the exit. It was protocol. All discharging patients were escorted out. The morning outside the glass doors was gray and cool, the kind of German autumn morning that feels clean rather than cold. At the door, Marcus stopped and turned to her. "I spent 3 years wondering if you made it," he said. "I spent 3 years wondering who to thank," she said. He shook his head slowly. "In the helicopter," he said, "you squeezed my hand so hard I could feel the bones in my fingers. You did that. You held on." He looked at her steadily. "I just carried you to the door." Claire felt something loosen in her chest, something she had not known was still tight. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine, the kind that arrives when relief and absurdity arrive at exactly the same moment. He smiled, a slow, real smile that changed his whole face, and then he turned and walked out into the gray morning light, his bag over his good shoulder, his steps steady and unhurried. Claire stood at the door and watched him go. She did not know yet what this would become. She did not know if they would call, or write, or find their way to the same city one day, and sit across a table from each other, and continue the conversation that had started in a helicopter over Kunar province, and picked up again in a hospital corridor in Germany, in the middle of the night. She only knew that the voice she had been trying to find for 3 years had just walked out into the light. And this time, she had seen his face.